have with me former celebrated Indian diplomat and also a member of Parliament, Mr. Shashi Tharoor. Mr. Tharoor, first of all, nice to have you on board and welcome to the show. Mr. Tharoor, Sri Lanka has seen change. On the 8th of January, we saw a new president taking oaths. Internationally, how do you view Sri Lanka's position now?
Oh, I think Sri Lanka's stature in the international community has undoubtedly been enhanced by the robust assertion of its democracy. You know, Sri Lanka, we forget sometimes, because of the way in which the war crowded out perceptions of the country, has actually been a remarkable success story. A flourishing democracy, and at the same time a country that has brought its people to very impressive human development indicators: high literacy, high standards of healthcare, a reduction in maternal mortality and children's mortality, a clean, attractive, pleasant environment. In many ways, Sri Lanka has a lot of good things about it, which the world is now being reminded of more and more since the war has finally been taken off the headlines.
Mr. Tharoor, some said that the international community disliked former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, and we saw the Congress-led government giving a cold shoulder to the previous government as well. Over the last few months, have you seen a change?
Well, I think, one shouldn't exaggerate the differences, because at every time India is very conscious that Sri Lanka is its nearest neighbor. And that therefore the special relationship cannot in any way be undervalued or undermined. And at the same time, I believe Sri Lanka is conscious of India's looming presence in its immediate vicinity. And therefore, whatever little differences of strategic perception or of tactical perception there might be, on the whole, our interests tend to be congruent. And wherever there have been tensions, by and large, they have tended to be resolved in the common recognition that we share a destiny in this part of the world, which cannot easily be separated or undone. Therefore, I don't want to overestimate or exaggerate the differences. There were some differences, but I would see them more as differences of degree rather than a fundamental differences. Now, certainly with the present government of Mr. Sirisena, President Sirisena and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, relations are very amicable indeed. And I think that, amongst other things, there is a perception in Delhi that this is a government that is very conscious of India, the value of India's friendship, and respects that actions taken by Colombo should not be seen in any way as unfriendly to or undermining the interests of India. So in this spirit, obviously, there is a tremendous feeling of closeness.
Both the President, that is Maithripala Sirisena, and the Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe's first overseas visit has been India. What does this mean?
Well, this is only natural. I mean, we have so much in common, and we are right next door to each other. I believe it's a very fine thing to do, but at the same time, I think it's a natural thing to do. You may remember the era in which every British Prime Minister, when elected, would travel first to America. And every American president, I think, used to travel first to England until Kennedy went to Ireland or something. I mean, the fact is that these are natural relationships which can't just be.
However, the Indian Prime Minister did not visit Sri Lanka. He chose otherwise.
Well, the Indian Prime Minister, I think, the new one, had a need to establish a certain presence on the world stage, and that is what guided his initial choices of destination. But having said that, let us not in any way underestimate how important Sri Lanka is. I know for certain that it's a very high priority in this Prime Minister's and this government's chain of hierarchical relationships. This is right on top.
Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe's visit today, what sort of avenues would that open as far as Indo-Sri Lanka relations are concerned?
I hope all sorts of options. I mean, in a relationship like ours, the complexity is in some ways quite simple, because there is no closed door. We want, obviously, very intense economic and trade relations. As you know, there's this comprehensive economic agreement. There have been some issues, I believe, from the Sri Lankan side, and some hesitations about it. Those need to be ironed out. But I think that very clearly, as a source of investment as well as a source of trade, India is a very valuable partner to Sri Lanka. Strategically, we have to discuss our common interests in the Indian Ocean, and we have to discuss our broader perspectives of the world as a whole. When it comes to third-party relations, I'm sure there will be an exchange of views on the subcontinent and elsewhere, and I suspect there'll be a lot of meeting ground on some of the basic things. I have not seen the Prime Minister's talking points, so I cannot tell you what else he will raise with Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. But it seems to me that all issues are likely to be on the table, and India's commitment to continue to help Sri Lanka with its reconstruction and rehabilitation in the northern part of the island will continue absolutely undiminished.
The Sri Lankan government has indicated that they want to closely work with the Indian government, with its closest neighbour. However, the Indian government has not made its position clear yet. What is the position of the Indian government on Sri Lanka?
Well, I'm sure it will become apparent in the course of this visit. I mean, there were already some very positive vibrations when President Sirisena came calling. And I think when Prime Minister Modi visited Sri Lanka, you all saw that there was a tremendous amount of affinity expressed. I think this visit by Prime Minister Wickremesinghe is likely to set the seal on a very important articulation of the mutual importance of the relationship. And I think you will be hearing things coming out of this trip which suggest that good relations are the new normal.
Mr. Tharoor, allegations have been levelled by certain quarters in Sri Lanka that India does not genuinely want Sri Lanka to have a bright future. Now, this has been witnessed over the last few decades or so as well. In your opinion, is Sri Lanka getting closer to its enemies, or are we playing with our enemy in our backyard?
I think the very thought of India as an enemy, to my mind, is absolutely preposterous. This is something that should not even be entertained by any reasonable-minded people. As somebody who has been involved in international affairs all my life, first at the United Nations and then in the Indian government as well as now in the Indian opposition, though I do chair the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Indian Parliament, I can say that there is nobody in the Indian establishment or in any Indian establishment that I have known that has had the slightest feeling along those lines. There has in fact been a tremendous sense of respect and admiration for Sri Lanka, as well as a great deal of affection for the place.
Is the Indian government genuine in its interest on Sri Lanka in order to make Sri Lanka a better nation?
Absolutely. You know, India is not terribly, shall we say, preachy. It doesn't go around telling other countries what to do or how to do it. It would like to be of help when Sri Lanka wants it, and it would like to be of support when Sri Lanka seeks it. And as far as...
Are you referring to the Sri Lankan government or the Sri Lankan people?
The Sri Lankan people, as far as we're concerned, we think of as our brothers. I mean, I honestly don't see any tension at all with the Sri Lankan people. You mustn't forget the great cultural consciousness of Sri Lanka and the Indian mind, going back to the days of the Ramayana. And at the same time, the sort of Rama Setu, the bridge, the mythical bridge, perhaps some would say, that unites India with Sri Lanka, has also to be constructed in our cultural imaginations, in our collective imaginations. So the Sri Lankan people are not the issue. If there's ever been any slippage of understanding, it has been government to government, never people to people. I would say that the most significant issue that has troubled our relationship has actually not been to do with India itself, but has to do with the treatment of the Tamil minority in Sri Lanka, which particularly after 1983 appeared to take a turn for the worse in ways that troubled our own people here and troubled our government in Delhi. We are obviously looking forward to a significant change there with the end of the war, the return of a democratic-minded Tamil people into the democratic political space in Sri Lanka, and we would like to see both constitutional and political progress in giving your people, the Tamils of Sri Lanka are your people, an honoured place in Sri Lanka's future.
Mr. Tharoor, let me drag your attention to the Prime Minister's visit to India today. As a goodwill gesture, Sri Lanka released 16 Indian fishermen in its custody. However, India has not taken any step, a positive step. Does this mean that India is a friend?
I'm not aware of India having any Sri Lankan fishermen in its custody. Therefore, the reciprocation could not happen because we haven't jailed anybody from Sri Lanka. What happens frequently, especially when let's face it, fishermen in all our countries, the same happens between India and Pakistan as well, are not necessarily particularly adept at figuring out the territorial limits of their waters, is that sometimes unintentionally people stray into other people's waters. And they are apprehended and normally released fairly quickly by all countries. We've had similar exchanges with Pakistan as well. So if it is reciprocation you're speaking about, frankly, there is no equivalent situation here. But I think if the government of Sri Lanka were to seek specific actions or concessions from Sri Lanka, they will almost certainly be granted, because my own view has been widely shared in the Indian government that with Sri Lanka we need an asymmetrical relationship, one in which India gives more than it takes, because it matters to us and because we're so much bigger.
The UNHRC sessions, Mr. Tharoor, has now commenced in Geneva. And the international community has been exerting pressure on Sri Lanka with its accountability issues over the last few years, especially after the end of the conflict. Now the US wants to bring in a new resolution. Now this resolution is a resolution that supports the island nation. Can the UN change its position time to time? You've been in the UN for many, many years.
Well, you see, positions are changed depending on votes in the UN Human Rights Council. And those votes are often a reflection of changed circumstances as well. If the perception is that the government of Sri Lanka is acting in good faith to address some of the human rights concerns that have been raised in previous reports of the Council, there is a new report today which I have not yet seen, which I believe was given in advance to the government of President Sirisena, but which is being released in Geneva only today. If that report speaks positively of progress by the new government in moving forward, I suspect that the old votes will change. The old votes were critical, even condemnatory, because of certain concerns that Sri Lanka was not living up to its own commitments in fulfilling the obligations that the international community expects it to take towards its own people. If there is a change in attitude and conduct, I am very confident that that will also be reflected in the vote.
What should be the position of India on the UNHRC report?
Well, it's wrong for me to prescribe, because I do hold a formal position as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee.
You're also a opposition MP.
I'm an opposition MP. But on foreign policy, we tend to believe that our political differences stop at the water's edge. There isn't a BJP foreign policy and a Congress foreign policy. There is only an Indian foreign policy. And on most of these matters, we tend to look at matters in the national interest in mind. So I don't speak purely as an opposition MP, but as somebody who cares about India. I think I have no idea how the government will decide to vote. I'm not part of that decision-making process. But I think that the vote should balance and will balance India's fundamental commitment to Sri Lanka and its well-being, its equally fundamental commitment to the well-being and integration of the Tamil people of Sri Lanka into Sri Lanka's political destiny. And at the same time, its long track record of respect for multilateral institutions in a context in which India's own votes have, as you know, been of all three kinds. In the last 5 years, if you analyze India's votes on the Sri Lanka issue in the Human Rights Council, you will find votes supporting Sri Lanka, votes abstaining, and votes criticizing Sri Lanka, all three.
Your government, the Congress-led government, abstained from voting as well.
I think the Congress-led government has also done all three things, depending on the issue and depending on the signal it felt necessary to send at a particular time. There was only one negative vote against Sri Lanka, but that was, I think, quite consciously done to send a signal to Colombo that the progress it was making, this is the previous government in Colombo, that the progress it was making was not satisfactory to Indian public opinion as well as to international law and international standards.
However, it is not the Indian policy that we're talking about right now, Mr. Tharoor. We're talking about the Congress policy and the BJP policy, isn't it?
No, on that particular occasion, the BJP did not disagree with the Congress party. And indeed, the DMK party, which subsequently left the coalition government, was also in favour. And the ADMK party, which was against the DMK party in Tamil Nadu, but which was ruling in Tamil Nadu, was also in favour. So it was actually a consensual position in the Indian political space that was reflected in that vote.
In terms of accountability issues, Sri Lanka has pledged to hold a domestic inquiry. Will India be concerned about the Sri Lankan Tamils?
India is always concerned about the Sri Lankan Tamils. Look, there is an affinity. Let's accept that for us, the people of Sri Lanka, whether Sinhalese or Tamil, are far too close to us, far too like us to be seen as quote-unquote foreigners. We do feel intimately bound up in your lives and in your future, while respecting your sovereignty and at the same time the fact that you occupy a different political and geographical space, and we respect that distance. But having said that, there is an extra element when it comes to the Sri Lankan Tamils, because there are also a large number of Tamils in our country who have, shall we say, an emotional connection, and who will therefore be an influential source of pressure on any government in Delhi in terms of ensuring there is no maltreatment of this minority. Such a thing is entirely normal. I mean, this is, you will see equivalents of this in 20 other countries around the world with different minorities who are in a neighbor. So I just want to stress that we will respect Sri Lanka's sovereignty, but we will expect Sri Lanka to live up to its own democratic principles and standards and promises. In many cases, there are commitments made by the government of Sri Lanka, which one has to admit have not been fully followed through. And the Indian government obviously wants to see Sri Lanka doing what is right for Sri Lanka and is done by Sri Lanka. There is no desire to dictate a solution from outside. It's not our place to do that. We just want you to follow through on what you have decided freely yourselves is the right thing to do for your country's future.
The Chinese intervention, is this a concern?
You know, I don't want to imply that our relations with Sri Lanka are in any way dependent on any third country.
However, your government, over the last few years, we saw the manner in which how you have summoned the Sri Lankan High Commissioner to the Foreign Affairs Committee and questioned about Chinese intervention.
Well, look, the Chinese presence in Sri Lanka did seem to us rather a lot. And, you know, when a Chinese naval submarine or two, and in fact our indications are that there were 2 nuclear Chinese submarines, call on a...
That was hearsay.
Well, we don't know. I mean, all I can say is, from publicly available sources like newspapers, if 2 Chinese nuclear submarines are calling at a Sri Lankan port, it would be irresponsible of any government in Delhi not to sit up and take notice. And all we could say about this is that as a very friendly, fraternal country next door, we would expect Sri Lanka to be a little concerned about not doing anything that needlessly ruffles feathers in your neighbor. By and large, I would say the feathers are not ruffled. By and large, relationships are good. And for the most part, what matters between India and Sri Lanka is what exists between India and Sri Lanka. Third countries are relatively marginal to these issues. But there must be some due deference paid, and I hope that the people of Sri Lanka will understand that we expect some deference to be paid to the sensitivities of a friendly country.
What challenges lie ahead for a country like Sri Lanka? New government, end of the war. Where do you see Sri Lanka in the next few years?
I honestly think the sky is the limit. Your potential is magnificent. You are a jewel in the Indian Ocean. You have tremendous possibilities in terms of tourism. You have great scope for economic development. You have a highly literate population that can easily be skilled. You have a friendly neighbor. I can't see any negatives. Now that the war is over, your one negative is gone. As long as you don't mess up the internal domestic political arrangements, the sky is genuinely the limit for Sri Lanka. You could be a shining star in the South Asian development story, beyond any shadow of a doubt. I have absolutely no doubt about that.
Mr. Tharoor, let's talk a little bit about you. What are you up to these days? Silent? Making lectures overseas? Is that all?
I'm not silent at all. In fact, if anything, I'm trying to be a little less loquacious in the Indian media, because it never does one much good to entertain your confreres, your brothers in the Indian media, who can be sometimes quite a challenge. But having said that, I have 3 or 4 obligations that are, as it were, all the time. One is I'm the Member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram, and the voters of Kerala, of which it is the capital, are extremely demanding voters. They have a lot of demands on me, and frankly, those demands need to be fulfilled on a daily basis. So that's a full-time job. Secondly, as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, we have meetings not only during Parliament sessions but between sessions. And a number of important issues involve our interface with the Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs, and that keeps me on my toes. Third, as you point out, I do travel abroad and as well as across India and make speeches and reach audiences. To my mind, I find that kind of public education is an important role for a political intellectual in our polities. I think we need to contribute to a greater awareness of the major public concerns in our country. And then fourthly, I write. I write when I can, and I don't often find the time, sadly, but I have occasional columns in various Indian outlets. I have a regular column once a month for Project Syndicate, which is syndicated in 88 countries around the world, including Sri Lanka. I believe one Sri Lankan newspaper carries my column. And at the same time, I have published a book in January called India Shastra, Reflections on the Nation in Our Time, which is exactly what it says, 100 different essays reflecting on different aspects of Indian life.
Ms. Tharoor, you were removed as the spokesperson of the Congress party. You want to tell me why?
I think there was a definite perception that it was in our best interests, mutual best interests. From the Congress party, they, shall we say, had views on certain important political issues that were somewhat different from mine, and it was important that a spokesman should hew 100% to the party line, as it were. And
you were not.
At the same time, let me finish. I too felt that it was going to be healthy for me to continue being an important and I hope effective voice of support for the party, while at the same time retaining the freedom to express my own views and not have to look over my shoulder. The differences were principally those of presentation. In other words, I think the specific issue that troubled my colleagues in the Congress party in Kerala and therefore led to that particular decision had to do with what they perceived as an unacceptable tolerance for Prime Minister Modi and his initiatives such as the Clean India or Swachh Bharat campaign. I felt, however, that as an Indian MP and an Indian citizen, it was my duty to serve when invited by the Prime Minister of the day to do something, and as long as it was not a political cause, and this was a non-political cause. So it was a genuine difference of opinion, but it was better that such differences of opinion not come in the way of an official spokesman's role. So I'm very happy. I continue to be invited by the party to speak frequently in Parliament on various issues, on various bills. I speak and write outside on public issues, and there's practically no difference in substance between me and the Congress party. But on some nuances, some ways of putting things forward, we may differ. And I think that's fine. I mean, I have, after all, a very, very long paper trail. People know what my core convictions are. I have been writing for more than 30 years on the importance of Indian pluralism and Indian society, representing its diversity as well as its rich potential. And I am not seen, I think, by anybody who has read me as being in any danger of jumping ship or being too close to the powers that be. However, I have also been brought up in a school of behavior that says that even when your opponent is your opponent, if he does or says something correct, it is the right thing to do to acknowledge it. That culture is disappearing in Indian politics, but I'm still holding on to it.
Does the Congress party have a future?
Very much so. In fact, I think you'll find it bouncing back much sooner than you think, because the way in which the present government is disappointing its strongest supporters, I have no doubt that by the time of the next elections in 2019, the Congress party will be very ready to take over.
And you will be an integral part of the Congress in 2019?
I certainly intend to be. I hope so. I hope the voters will ensure that that remains the case.
Do you believe that the UN needs to change?
Yes, not because it has failed or it's. I'm not a critic of the UN. I think that it's precisely because the UN has done so well over the last 70 years that it's worth reforming for the next 70. You know, we must have a UN that is relevant to the geopolitical realities of 2015 and the economic realities of 2015, but we have a UN that's still anchored in the founding principles of 1945. For that reason, I think we need to make some change and try and adjust the structure of the organization and some of the things it does, to take into account that when the UN was established, it was 51 countries, all predominantly Western and European, and now it's 193 countries, predominantly Asian and African. So there is a different world now, and the UN must reflect that better.
Do we need a UN Security Council?
Yes, because there must be a body that is tasked with issues of peace and security. Now, obviously, increasingly we're finding that the council members are not agreeing with each other on many such issues. And when the council is stalemated, then I'm afraid things don't work so well. But we need a council, and it's played a demonstrably useful part in preventing a third world war, because it was the decisions and actions authorized by the Security Council that diffused a number of conflicts around the world during the Cold War and didn't allow them to ignite a superpower conflagration. That, to my mind, is something we should be very positive about.
However, the activities of the United Nations Security Council, we saw the manner in which the 2001 war against Afghanistan was launched, the war against Iraq, the Syrian conflict now, which has escalated to the next level, and we've seen the manner in which how the Libyan conflict also got out of hand. We saw the leader of Libya being shot dead by coalition forces as well. Do you think the composition of the UN Security Council should change?
Yeah, but not for the reason specifically that you mentioned, because 2001 Afghanistan, frankly, nobody in the world disagreed with that action. Everyone was hostile to Al-Qaeda and supportive of what the US was doing. Whereas on the later occasions you mentioned, there was a serious division of opinion in the Council and across world opinion. And that division of opinion is what made the Council unable to act as a united force. If you look at the world today, what we're talking about is adding members in both the permanent and non-permanent categories, and that may perpetuate disagreements as well. But what will happen is that decisions on which the Council is able to agree will be decisions that have much greater legitimacy because the Council is more representative than it is today.
Mr. Tharoor, I have had this question for a very long period of time. You've been serving in the United Nations for many, many years. Why is that the superpowers like the US, the UK are not subjected to human rights violations? We see the manner in which how coalition forces have been involved in human rights violations in many countries like Iraq and even Afghanistan for that matter. However, nothing has been brought forward. What is the reason behind this? Is the UN acting with bias?
Well, I would say that every country is free to raise these issues if it so wants to. One of the reasons countries don't do it may well be that they value their bilateral relationships with a country like the US so much that they don't want to get the US hostile to them, and so they don't raise it. But there's nothing preventing any council member from raising any concern about any other council member. I don't think there's a problem there. There's no built-in bias into the UN structure. But as I often point out, the UN is a mirror of the world. You see, it reflects not only our agreements and our disagreements, but it also reflects the power asymmetries that exist in the world. And if for example, in the Security Council, the 14 other countries are extremely conscious of their bilateral relationship with the 15th, the US, that may be reflected in the positions they take. The world is a real place, and there are real equations here that people have to bear in mind. But the UN structure does not militate against taking any such action.
My final question to you, Mr. Tharoor. If the verdict was different in the year 2007 and you were appointed as a Secretary General, what would you have done differently?
That kind of question is not only impossible to answer, but wrong to answer, because somebody was elected, and any comment I make would be seen as a rebuke to him or a criticism of him, which I don't intend to express. Let me say, obviously we're different people. We would have tackled things differently, particularly the ways in which we would have expressed our ways would have been different. But we have a Secretary General. I think it's the duty of every country in the world to work with him supportively, and India has done so, and I'm not going to be the one that undermines that in any way, shape or form.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.